Welcome to Business Mastery with Dawn Kennedy, your quick under 45-minute dose of expert insights and strategies to make a positive impact on your business and life. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. And today we're going to get into something that many of us probably know very well, and that is being neurodivergent and running a business and all the things that come with that and the frustrations. And guess what? We have somebody on here who is a coach for neurodivergent people, has strategies and tactics and all the things that we could learn today that's going to help making our business run just a little more smooth. So thank you so much, Christy, for being.
Hey, thanks. Yes, thanks so much for having me, Dawn. I always love talking to you, whatever the topic.
I love seeing you. Can you tell everyone who you are and who you serve?
Yeah, so my name is Christy Lingo, aka the ADHD Mompreneur, and I am an executive function and accountability coach primarily for ADHD mom business owners, but I also do just general executive function coaching and accountability coaching. So I have male clients that are 27 years old, and I have females that have never had children that are in their 60s that are just trying to wrap their brains around a recent ADHD diagnosis. So even though my primary like niche is ADHD mom business owners, because I myself am an ADHD mom business owner and I kind of created a program that I was looking for. It's not the only person that I am working with, because frankly, I think that there is a big need out there for entrepreneurs of all shapes and sizes and to get the support that they need for their neurodivergent brains.
Yeah, I love that. So let's just start with the basics. Let's talk about executive function, neurodivergence, what kinds of differences that you can see. And I'm sure there's more than 5 or 6 of us doing this right now on the video, or they're listening in the car and they're going, oh my gosh, that's probably me. So let's start there. What does it mean and how does it show up?
Okay, so executive function are their brain process. They take place in the prefrontal cortex, which is a little part in the front of your brain. And for the most part, they're powered by a neurotransmitter called dopamine. And dopamine is like epinephrine or serotonin. They're these neurotransmitters, they chemical messengers that carry messages from your body to your brain, essentially. And dopamine works with executive function. And if you happen to fall into the ADHD category, now it is not 100% like confirmed. We're still like, since neuroscience has really exploded in the last 2 decades, and we're now able to do these brain scans and see things, and right now what they're researching is the fact that dopamine is either in less supply or kinda, like, cycles through too quickly for those of us with ADHD, and since it supports executive function, which is things like motivating, or task initiation, organizing, planning, focus, transitioning from one task to another. Those are all things that are executive functions. And people with ADHD, if you don't have kind of the gasoline to make the car go, you're not going to be able to get that motor running up and running, right? And so when people are diagnosed with ADHD and executive function problems and they receive medication for it, typically that medication is going to treat the dopamine side of it somewhere. It's either going to like increase the amount of dopamine allowed in your system so that you can kind of get that part of your brain going and be able to focus or concentrate or whatever it is that you're needing to do. Or it's going to slow down how it cycles through your system. So it's going to kind of stay in your system a little longer, because if it moves through too quickly, you're not going to be able to kind of like reap the benefits of what little dopamine you have. And there are tons of ways that you can increase dopamine. If whether you have ADHD or not, there are ways that you can kind of boost your dopamine as, an entrepreneur. If you're looking to do some focus work with things like going out and getting some sunshine or taking a walk or drinking coffee, even something like chewing gum, which is considered like fidgeting, those are stimming actions that can help to stimulate more dopamine in your system and help you to concentrate and focus if you need to.
Amazing. So, what ways do busy executives or busy entrepreneurs show up and realize that they have something with their executive function? What are the symptoms that they're seeing? So, the one that comes to mind that I hear the most, and I have two children with ADHD, and didn't know all these things way back then, but was procrastination was a big
Mhm.
um
Yes, and part of it with procrastination, and so I'm a kind of a total neuroscience nerd. I told my husband a couple of months ago, I was like, if I wasn't almost 50, and who knows what will happen, but I would totally go back to school for neuroscience because in the sort of past 15 years that I have been learning about and working with ADHD populations, I am fascinated by how and why the brain kind of like works the way that it does and does the things that it does. So, in terms of procrastination, it is about when you get a rush, when you get excited, when you get anxious, when you get stressed, your body releases dopamine. So, unbeknownst to so many of us that would wait until the last minute to write a 30-page paper the night before it's due when we're in college, the reason we've trained our brains that it's better to do that because we get the dump of the dopamine that we need in order to focus and pay attention. And we can just lock in and just keyboard warriors all night long, tick, 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 and knock that thing out of the park and probably get a fairly good grade on it, more so than we would had we like done the little bits and pieces. The issue becomes if you become that junkie, right? If you become addicted to the adrenaline or the last minute part, you can start to develop anxiety and stress and sort of other comorbid conditions in addition to your ADHD. So I don't recommend procrastinating as a coping mechanism, but I do understand how and why it is that many of us with ADHD do sort of like opt for that last minute.
right. Right. Where else will we see it if I step into my business and what's facing me that I'm going to struggle?
So coming up with too many ideas or like switching course too often, not kind of seeing something through to be able to see if it's actually got a good return on investment, right? So, you come up with one marketing strategy and you try it for a month, and either you get bored with it or you're not seeing the results that you want or whatever. So then you switch to a different strategy, or you put out one program and then immediately you turn and start to put out a different program that you want to do. It's constantly sort of cycling through all of these different ideas because new, novel, different, fun, exciting, those are the things that our brains crave because again, that is going to stimulate dopamine in our system. So we get really bored really quickly. And honestly, I think one of the biggest challenges I have with my entrepreneurial clients is being like, no, we're going to try this a little bit longer. We really need to kind of see this through and see how it goes before we pivot and turn to something else. Because if you're constantly pivoting, you've been in business long enough. I've been in business for over 15 years. Y- you're never going to kind of see progress and growth if you're just constantly changing all the time.
Right, right. And we do see that a lot, don't we? That people either say it's just not working, and maybe it is that they are bored with it and they don't know that that's actually an underlying reason. Right.
Yeah.
So this is another one I have to ask of task priorities, right? Being able to prioritize what's most important, next important, next important, next important. I think that's also another challenge for people who are neurodivergent and ADHD because everything, I guess, it makes sense that you would try to make everything important because you would get the dopamine rush is kinda what I'm hearing.
Yes, exactly. And so I'm sure that many of the people that are watching or listening and you have heard of the Eisenhower time matrix. It's that like 4 blocks where it's like something is either urgent, not important, so on and so forth. I think that those terms are kind of too vague for those of us with ADHD because it's like uh, if I can't prioritize, right? If because prioritization to your point is an executive function. So if this is something that I'm struggling with, being able to determine if something is important, well, that's a sliding scale. It's going to depend on so many different factors. So you're just going to get yourself in this decision fatigue loop of trying to figure out what's important, right? It's just gonna like cycle and cycle and cycle. And so what a lot of neurodivergent entrepreneurs tend to do is default to what is fun or exciting or the things that you like to do. And so maybe you like to do social media, but you hate to do invoicing. And so you let all of these invoices that you need to send out to clients so you can actually get paid build up and build up and build up, and you don't send them out, which would be something that would be important or urgent, and in lieu of something that maybe isn't necessarily important or urgent because it's what you want to do or what feels good to do. So something that I have tried to do over the years is to create a more specific system to help people with prioritizing. And so instead of just being like urgent, important, not injured, not urgent, not important, kind of very sort of random, is more specific questions. And I call it trimming your to-do list. So T in trim is for time sensitive. So does your task or project have a due date? Or does the part that you need to do have a due date? Next would be R, which would be required. Like, is this step that you need to do required so that you can either move to a next step or that you don't become a roadblock for somebody else in your organization, right? So, does your team need you to approve something so that they can send out an invoice or post something on social media or, like reply back and schedule a client? Like, are you being a roadblock? So is this something that is required? Basically, something that if you do it, it will have a positive outcome, or if you don't do it, there could be a consequence involved. The next would be I, which is for impactful. So, is this something that is going to be impactful on your life? And I think that this can apply both to your business. So, this would be something like marketing your business, right? Or, sending those invoices out, which we'll get to in the next step also. But it could also be something like making a doctor's appointment or, exercising. Those are all going to have impacts on your life if you do them. So while it may not at the outset, like making a doctor's appointment or exercising may not come to your brain as a priority necessarily. If you're looking at your entire to-do list and you're like, oh, well, I have all these things to do. I don't necessarily feel like this thing right here is a priority. In the end, if it's going to positively impact your life by scheduling that doctor's appointment or negatively impact your life by not scheduling it, it definitely would be considered a priority. And then the final, letter M in trim is for money related. So this would be things like paying your bills or invoicing your clients, something that will make you money if you do it or potentially cost you money if you don't do it. And I find that if you're able to kind of look at your to-do list and answer those questions and kind of like work through that, you may be able to more easily determine which things you actually need to be doing that day and which things can maybe wait till later. Now, that's phase one, right? Is figuring out which things would be the priorities. There is also the next step, which is actually doing the things that you've determined are priorities, which comes down to like motivation and task initiation. And that's where working with somebody like me as an accountability coach can help you, where yeah, sometimes the things that are priorities are not fun. They're not the exciting things. They're not the things that we want to do, right? But when you work with a coach that is going to, what I do is we get together once a week, we talk about what's on your to-do list, we prioritize that to-do list, and then we assign times like, oh, I know you're going to need 2 hours to do this. When do you have 2 hours this week to work on it? And then depending on the client, what I will do is before that work session, I'll be like, hey, it's a half hour before you wanted to start working on X, Y, and Z. Start transitioning, go to the bathroom, fill up your water cup, and get anything you need to work on that project. Or I may also follow up at the end of when that work session would be and be like, hey, I know you wanted to work on this today. Tell me about how it's going. Because there's something about that like obligation, accountability piece that can make you a little bit more motivated to take action on those less than exciting tasks or projects that are on that to-do list.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in following on with that, just so that we can kind of get this out there. There are people who would say it's just a lack of discipline. I know I heard that through my life. I've heard that, but I can't help but wonder how much of our coping and our strategies and pulling all-nighters and doing those things, that got us through to where we were, then became habits, and those habits are so hard to break without having a structure and having a way, to do this. Because what you're saying, it's so incredibly, like, normalizing, like, yes, time block your calendar, yes, do these things, and I have to wonder how many of us are walking around habitually just responding in neurodivergence because that's what we've basically always done to cope.
Yeah, and so, one thing that I talk to people about when I get it, because being on social media, being on YouTube, things like that, of course, I get comments all the time, "This is just normal behavior, everybody experiences this," and absolutely, 100%, they are correct. Everybody does experience symptoms that are similar to those of us with ADHD because it is related to dopamine production. So if you have a long weekend, like for instance, this past weekend, we had a swim meet. We had to be up at 5 o'clock every morning. We had to be to the facility at 6:30 in the morning. We were there for 6 or 7 hours each day. Then we came home and kind of went back and did the same thing the next day. We were exhausted. On Monday, I had so much trouble getting my brain to lock in. Now, obviously, I have ADHD, but even my child that doesn't have ADHD and my husband were feeling the effects of being really tired and sort of spent. So absolutely, you're gonna feel a lack of motivation or, trouble focusing and things like that. If you're tired, if you're hungry, if you've been really stressed for a long time, maybe you're going through a stressful time in your business or some divorce or like, who knows? Right now, the world can be very stressful at all times, right? And so you might start to experience some of these symptoms that you would notice if you have low executive function right then. The difference is that those of us with ADHD experience these things every day without fail, right? It's not and obviously some days are going to be better than others. With women, interestingly enough, when you're going through your cycle, when you're ovulating, you have really high levels of estrogen. Estrogen is required for dopamine production. So you're going to be it's going to be a lot easier for you to motivate yourself or concentrate or organize or plan during that time of your cycle versus when you are actually, like going through your period, you are going to have really low levels of estrogen. And that also can contribute to mood regulation and, how tired you're feeling. All of those things are all connected to dopamine production. And so, yes, people can experience it, but they have noticed in brain scans and in all of these studies that they're done that there is a definite difference between people that are diagnosed with ADHD and people that are just sort of like experiencing an anxious time in their life or they're tired or they're hungry or so on and so forth. And I think that, you know, whereas 30, 40 years ago, we looked at ADHD. We didn't even call it ADHD at that point in time. It was called ADD. And it seemed like it was only something that like 10-year-old boys were diagnosed with. So we've come so far in 30 or 40 years. But I think that as we can research more and learn more about the differences in people's brains and actually see it and see how different people's brains are through these scans and things like that, we can start to maybe create a little bit more accommodations
Yeah.
for those people that are out there or like put people in places and in jobs that work with their brains. And I think that that's why so many of us with ADHD are drawn to entrepreneurship is because we can control our own schedule. We can control how much work we have to do or that we need to do. Like, I think that it's very appealing to us to kind of be able to have that control because then if we don't do something, it's not like we are letting other people down or we're getting yelled at or we're having these like negative feelings come towards us. We know that we're the people that are in control of all that. And I think that that is really appealing when it comes to, your point about being motivated or following through on tasks and things like that. If we know that we're not gonna get yelled at about it, it's a very appealing thing to be our own boss.
Right, absolutely, and there are a lot of, jobs, like being a paramedic. I did that for about 10 years, and, the schedule was very flexy, and I had a lot of time off. It was very stressful when I was there, but, when you're on scene with something, the dopamine obviously is running pretty high, which brings me to my other question about what about those of us who get sucked in and we hyper focus and 7 hours goes by and there's been no water and no potty break and no food and the dog is crying for his dinner. That also happens. So can you
Yeah.
talk to us about that as well, this hyper focus?
Yeah, and I think when harnessed in the right way, hyperfocus is like one of ADHD's superpowers. Because you do have this ability to get in the flow and really lock in that maybe people that are neurotypical may not be able to do. The Again, it kind of comes down to, is it going to impact your mental health in other ways by, overdoing certain things? Because a lot of times hyper focus leads to perfectionism, right?
Mm,
Okay, well, that's not also a great thing
no.
to get sucked into. Hyper focus can mean that you're ignoring other tasks and projects. To your point, the dog hasn't gone outside, the kids haven't been fed, you haven't been fed, you need to go to the bathroom, like all of these different things. So it's really about like so much of ADHD is about learning to work with your brain and not against your brain, right? And I think that we've kind of built a society here in the United States that's very much about like multitasking and doing these kinds of things. And that is like the death knell for ADHD brain. Like constantly transitioning from one thing to another is really, really taxing on our executive function. And so by lunchtime, we can be completely exhausted. Right. And so,
Hang on. Say that louder for everyone in the back of the room. Well, even people who are neurotypical who may be able to do that a little bit, it's still I think studies have shown that multitasking is not a good idea,
no, it's
um,
a
at
it's a
all.
terrible idea. In fact, the word multitask did not exist until computers existed. And it was originally a computer term when they were asking the computer to actually perform multiple functions at one time, which a computer can do. But what you're doing when you quote unquote multitask is you're just task switching. Task switching involves executive function. And every time you go from writing an email to sending a text message to, you know, responding to another email, and you're just constantly changing, you're losing a little bit of that executive function. Whereas if you would kind of like group like tasks together and do all of your emails and kind of like get into a little hyper focused email writing zone, do all those things at one time and then switch to the next task, you're gonna find that you're gonna be more proficient and productive throughout your day because you're gonna be able to harness the power of your hyper focus, right? The other part of it is being able to learning to stop the hyper focus, right? And there are different things that you can do. For instance, setting an alarm, use your cell phone, or if you have a digital assistant like the I can't say her name because I've got one right here, but I've like I'll be like, set an alarm. In fact, I was editing a podcast just before we jumped on together here. I I asked her to set a timer for 45 minutes so that I would have time to go to the bathroom and get a snack and fill up my water cup before we started this interview today. So I was able to kind of like break that hyper focus by having that alarm go off. Or, knowing that asking your kids to come in and be like, listen, at 4 o'clock, we're going to go to the pool today. So come in and get me at 4 o'clock because nothing will help you break your hyper focus more than a child banging on your door and being like, "You told me you were gonna take me to the pool right now." They are relentless. They will not let that go, right? And so, I think it's about, with the hyper focus, it can be a tool for good, if you are able to use it when you group tasks together and you can unitask and be very productive and knock several tasks that are similar out at one time. But you also need to put parameters in place so that you can do things like setting the alarms and, breaking that hyper focus. And then, we had kind of touched on the perfectionism like idea, the idea of training yourself to step away when it's good enough if you don't really have the time and the energy to put into making it the perfect version that you originally might have had.
Right. Okay. So approaching your day, right? We're gonna pretend this is a day. Approaching your day, and for everybody listening who's listening to this and goes, I do that. I do that. I do that. Whether or not they've been diagnosed, I think this could help on both sides. But I think there are a lot of us from the 70s and 80s that are running around without a diagnosis. There really are. I can just put that out there. So if you are an entrepreneur and you're listening and you're like, yeah, okay, so I've been told that I just miss deadlines all the time, or I've told that, I didn't send invoices again, or whatever it is. What do we do? How do we start our day? So we talked about trimming, and then you talked a little bit about the accountability. But prior to that, how do we even organize it so we know where to get started and where to start to ask for help?
Yeah, and I mean, like, that is a very big question, right? Like, it is, and the thing is that every person with ADHD is going to be different, right? They are all going to experience the different symptoms. For instance, prior to becoming an ADHD coach, I was a professional organizer. I am really great at organizing things, whether in my house or somebody else's house. Organizing is an executive function. So you would be like, wait, Christy, didn't you just say that people with ADHD struggle with executive functions? Well, some of us struggle with some of them, but not necessarily all of them, right? So I think that the first steps, not necessarily even just in your day, but if you start to suspect that you might have ADHD, right? And similar to autism, it's a spectrum, right? Some people are going to have very severe ADHD that may require different types of treatment. They might need therapy and coaching and medication. And then there's other people that may have milder symptoms that can just deal with coping strategies, right? And so what I would recommend is learn about what ADHD is, learn about what it looks like, because what I noticed is I could go through and read these books and identify the symptoms and the places where I needed to build coping strategies into my life because I read about, I was like, oh, I don't really struggle with the organizing thing, but maybe the task initiation thing, the like follow through thing. Like I'm really good at starting tasks, but I'm not really great at finishing them. I joke that I'm a 97 percenter. I always get 97% done and then I walk away and start something different. So there's things that are like that. So learn about what ADHD looks like. And then a lot of times, depending on what book you're looking at or, website, or there's some really great YouTube channels that are out there. Um, Once you can kind of identify what your particular issues may be, you can start to look for specific coping strategies for those things. So if you struggle with prioritizing your day or blocking your day or time management or something like that, you can look up specific ways that you can manage your time better as somebody with ADHD. Because I will say that one of the reasons I wanted to start my business and start the podcast that I have is because so much of the business advice that's out there is geared towards neurotypicals. And so, like, this idea of like, well, you just have to be consistent.
Yes.
Yeah, great, awesome. That is like the hardest thing in the world for anybody with ADHD is to be consistent. You might be able to be consistent for a week, you might be able to be consistent for a month, you might be able to be consistent for a year, but a lot of times if you fall off the wagon, that's it. Like it's so hard to kind of get back into that again because consistency is just not one of the things that we're really great at, right? And so I find that like if you can find advice that suits where you need to create some coping strategies and then start to apply, and what I always say is use the what you find as a springboard, right? There's not a single coping strategy that I have in place that is the exact version that I read about in a book or that I saw on a video or I heard on a podcast. Like I always kind of take it and make it my own. And I think that sometimes the rigid thinking of like if I don't do it exactly the way that she told me in this video or that he told me in this book, then I need to find a different way to make it work. And I think, again, that's kind of where working with somebody who is a coach that understands neurodivergence or ADHD or autism or whatever it is that you might be dealing with can help you to create those coping strategies that will be unique to the challenges that you have.
Yeah, that's so important. And the other side of that too, and I do wanna ask you about this, is, biological clocks, energy, those things. There are some times where if you read some of the business books are like, "Knock these things out in the morning," and I can tell you that I know a lot of people that are like, "I can't touch any of that stuff in the morning. I gotta touch
Yep.
that stuff at, like, 2 o'clock." So, what are your thoughts on how we figure out kinda what's best for us as well? We start to wanna put these coping skills in place, but we don't wanna do it, like you said, rigidly following somebody else's, um, maybe strategy. It wouldn't work for us the same. We might ditch the entire thing instead of tweaking it.
Exactly, exactly. And so I say to my clients that I think that energy management is actually more important than time management when it comes to being somebody with ADHD. And one of the things that I highly encourage the people I work with to do is to figure out what their chronotype is. And a chronotype is it's in your DNA, right? So genetically there are like 4 different chronotypes, and it's basically like the lion is your early morning, right? Your peak energy is gonna be in the morning, and then you're just gonna kind of, like, slowly go downhill and really start to, lose momentum maybe about, like, 6 o'clock at night, and then you go to bed a little bit earlier, versus the wolf, which is a night owl, right? So you take a little bit longer to get ramped up, but then later in the day, maybe 3, 4 o'clock, that's when things start to really kick in for you. And then 50% of the population is what they call the bear, which is the middle of the day. And this is part of the reason why our society is built around this kind of like 8 to 5 mentality,
Yeah.
because for the majority of society, that 8 to 5 and really kind of peaking about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon is where about 50% of the population lies in terms of like, that's when everything's humming. All of your neurotransmitters are going. And like you're able to focus better, or you're able to pay attention to somebody that's talking for meetings and things like that. And then the final one is the dolphin, and that's sort of like all over the place, not really consistent with anything. And what I've found is they say that it's only about 5% of the population that is truly a dolphin, and I think that a lot of times people with ADHD think if they start learning about chronotypes that they would fall into the dolphin category, but really what it is that they've just been sort of like throwing spaghetti at the wall for so long, and they just kinda, like, go with when their dopamine is highest that they think that they're a dolphin, but if they can really start to hone in and figure out what times of day they do really feel energetically, they have a little bit more energy, then they're able to assign those times for the things that require a little bit more focus and a little, they require more concentration. They might be a little bit harder to motivate themselves to do. And this can apply to work, but it can also apply to other things. Like I tell the story. So I'm a morning person. I love to wake up early. Like almost every day, wake up at 4:30. I like to be up early. It's just how I am. Um, I used to beat myself up for not doing the dishes at night after dinner, and I understand that there's probably some people out there that are just like, like shrunk back in horror at the idea of leaving dishes in the sink overnight. But I would just like it was just such a struggle. It would cause me so much stress and so much anxiety, and I didn't understand like I just hate the fact that I am tired and I don't wanna do this, and why do I have to do this? And so I shifted my thinking because I knew I had more energy in the morning. I started doing my dishes in the morning. No problem now. They're usually done by the time my kids get up for school and the time that they go to breakfast, but it was easier for me to initiate that task that I really hated doing in the morning when my energy was higher than it was for me to try to force myself to do it at the end of the day when my energy was lowest, and really my genes are telling me, "Hey girl, it's time for you to wash your face and go to bed."
Right. Right. So how do we start to figure out our chronotype? Do you do, like, a time study for a week or 2 or
Well,
like
there is actually a quiz that you can take. Dr. Michael Bruce, spelled Breus. He has a book called The Power of When, and I believe the website is The Sleep Doctor, but if you just look up chronotype quiz,
Okay.
it should pop right up if you look it up. And again, this isn't like woo-woo science. This is actual, like, science done by actual scientists that can see this, and while it's not directly related to circadian rhythms, it's kind of in that same sort of like, um, boat where it's like if you were to go out to the forest and had no cell phones and no alarm clocks and no whatever, like, and just were able to figure out your natural rhythm to your day, what would it be? And that's kind of what it's exploring a little bit. And, I knew right away that I was a lion. I've had people take it and think that they're bears, and then, like, as they sort of start to follow that path, they start to realize that they're actually wolves or maybe that they're actually lions. It's just that because so much of their life they've kind of built into that 9 to 5 society, they think that that's naturally the way that their body goes, but it actually is just them trying to, fit a round peg in a square hole.
Right. Yeah, so important. And I love this conversation because once you know that, and if you get a diagnosis or if you start managing your time and doing things better, for yourself, it's going to serve you at another level. Maybe you won't be as exhausted. Maybe you'll stop beating yourself up because you have to finish that tomorrow.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some permission here that I know a lot of business owners, we don't like to give ourselves permission to give ourselves, more days or to give ourselves, we think we're being lazy or we think there's a lot that is out there in the business world, like you said, that talks about, consistency, talks about don't be lazy, talks about hustle culture, but is that realistic? Is that realistic, especially if you're somebody who is neurodivergent and you don't know the best time of day for you to be doing these things?
Well, and I think too, like, I'm actually happy that I feel like at least in the algorithms that I'm being fed right now, that, like, the hustle culture is kind of, like, taking a bit of a step back,
Yeah.
and it's still about working hard, but it's not about working hard on everything. It's about, like, doing the hard things during your peak energy times, delegating more. You don't have to do everything yourself, like learning to let go of the things that don't matter, to your point about hyper focus. And we talked a little bit about perfectionism, like what is good, what is perfect, and is there a range in there that when we don't have the energy to dedicate to something because we have so many different boxes that we have to tick off that day, is there a way that we can learn to accept good enough, right? So I feel like it's all kind of this same ecosystem of, like, understanding your where you are energetically, understanding where your strengths are and where your challenges lie, creating coping strategies that kind of, like, work together with all of that stuff. I think that that is, as an ADHD entrepreneur, how you can build success, build consistency, like, see the progress and the success that you are working towards, rather than just sort of like spreading your energy so much all the time that you're just spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning, but you're not going anywhere.
Right. Right. That's very frustrating to be on the hamster wheel.
And it's exhausting. And I think that that is why so many people that are entrepreneurs, whether you're neurodivergent or not, tend to throw the towel in. I think I had said that, or I had heard the one time that it was like 3 years is kind of like the average. Like, if by 3 years you haven't seen what you deemed success for the business that you're in, that most people walk away. So if you can make it past 3 years, you're better than a huge percentage of the business owners that are out there, because, like, it's exhausting and a lot of times people don't make it.
Yeah. Wow. Where can people find you, learn more about your coaching and what you do? And we are going to put the links to Dr. Bruce's book and things, but I know your podcast also. When does that come out each week? And we're going to link that as well.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, I have ADHD, so I'm terrible with consistency, so it does not come out each week, but you can find it. I have 51 episodes that you can watch either on YouTube or all the major podcast platforms, and Spotify, Apple, and it's called the ADHD Mompreneur. So you can find that there. I also have a website. If you just go to the ADHDmompreneur.com, you can look up more information about me and about my programs. And actually, that trim list that I was talking about earlier, I have a copy of that you can download and print out for yourself. So I'll be sure to send over a link for that too, in case anybody wants to print that out to help them prioritize their to do list.
That's fantastic. All right. So we're going to put all that down inside the show notes. So if you find us when we launch or 2 years later, you can still reach out. You can find Christy. You can tell her, send me text messages. Missed it again. I did it again. And see if we can't help you feel more successful. I love this conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. And if anybody has any additional questions about ADHD, please feel free to reach out on social media or you can email me, Christy at the ADHDmompreneur.com.
Amazing. All right. We'll talk to y'all next time on the next episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. Take care. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. If you want to learn more about me, you can go to dawnkennedy.com, and you can now check us out on YouTube as well as, of course, any of your favorite platforms that host podcasts. Take care.